Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of the Aquarian Age podcast. My name is Sunny Khan and I am your host. The time of the dark moon has arrived and the third lunar cycle of the year is coming to an end. I have a moon mandala in my flat which I use to keep track of the moon cycles, and it is surrounded by protective crystals, herbs and berries. Buried under might be a better word than surrounded. My biological mother was cold, abusive, cruel and sadistic, and also cursed constant ill and misfortune upon me. And throughout my life, that has invited women who mirror this dynamic, and that means that I need to protect myself against the lunar influences, as they can bring a great deal of evil and really curtail my life experiences, both inner and outer. So the time of the dark moon is particularly dangerous for me, as it is when the ill-wishing is at its most intense. So I always need to keep my eye on the moon, and when the dark moon approaches, I always brace myself and go into red alert mode. I really ought to get myself a flashing red light for my flat and keep it on throughout the period of the dark and new moon to increase my vigilance. These energies never strike in the same place twice, but are always adapting, and they can affect me mentally or physically, and often both. In the last dark moon, my halogen oven burned out, but luckily didn't catch fire, but just melted and filled the kitchen with toxic fumes. When I removed it and cleared the area up, I noticed that 2 young mice had got trapped in a bowl in a shelf underneath it and had died, a slow tortured death of dehydration. The agonized deaths of those poor souls had provided the required dark energy for a black magic curse to weave its way into my life. Well, the flat didn't burn down. There wasn't enough dark energy generated for that. But as I am financially on the breadline, I am now without an oven, and it will be some time before I can save up for another one, perhaps a year. A minor trifle in the grand scheme of things, but these things do accumulate into a significant effect over successive moon cycles. It also illustrates very well the manner of occult influences, in this case ill-wishing and curses, and how they can manifest. The Sun and Venus are still tightly conjoined, and I have found myself experiencing a significant shift in my relationship with the archetypal feminine, and a significant shift in my solar energy, with a lot of negative influences being cleansed in both areas, and significant heart healing occurring. The heart brings eros, which is your quality of life or feel-good factor. When you have experienced profound trauma, your inner life is effectively dead. Though you may look healthy on the outside, on the inside you are like a zombie. In our culture there is a general lack of regard for the power which women exert on the inner world, and the violence they can enact against men in this realm. In a material culture which is largely ignorant to the inner world, this violence is rendered invisible, but it turns living beings into zombies, and is one of the major sources of patriarchal behaviour, which at the end of the day is generally enacted by males who have been cut off and numbed by this emotional violence from women. Feminism does not address this dynamic between the two sexes, and instead portrays males as the problem, which actually feeds this damaging dynamic, rather than healing it. It's another source of female ill-wishing and cursing, which renders the inner life of males destitute, and makes patriarchal behaviour, including violence, more likely. The gathering of planetary energy in Pisces has now shifted into Aries, with Chiron, Ceres, the Sun and Venus all present. I am currently having my Chiron return, which is still a degree and a half off exact yet, but that is the reason why my male wounding issues are coming to the fore right now, especially with regard to the feminine, which is no doubt the influence of the Sun and Venus conjunction, which also conjuncted my natal Chiron. Neptune and Mercury are still in Pisces, with the conjunction between them now spent, and Mercury soon to ingress into Aries. Saturn and Jupiter are still in Aquarius, the last remnant of that great gathering that kicked off the year, and the recent conjunction of Mars and the North Node in Gemini is now waning. The Moon is also in an exact conjunction to Saturn as I record this, which is significant, as I will be talking not only about the structure of the occult world in this podcast, but will also be raising significant security issues that every spiritual practitioner needs to guard themselves against, especially during these dangerous times. And these are both very Saturnian themes that are being highlighted. So that is the state of play of the celestial sphere. Let me now move on to the contents of the current episode. I've been doing a lot of contemplating on the nature of occult influences and finding a lot of different strands coming together in my mind that really need consolidating. So I thought this episode would be a good opportunity for me to bring it all together into a coherent account, one that I hope will better illuminate the workings of the occult world. Now, what do I mean by the word occult world? What I mean is a realm of physical, mental and emotional influences that are not visible to our normal senses, but which require the development of some psychic or intuitive abilities in order to render visible. I know, for example, that black magic was involved in the incident with the mice and my halogen oven, because I could feel it. It was a terribly dark and malevolent energy. I even know the source, the person, from whence that curse or ill-wishing came, as through my practice of yoga I have developed a certain sensitivity in this area, and I have also cultivated a Shakti that illuminates these matters for me. For most people, however, it will seem to be an accident, and any talk of black magic, curses and the dark moon will seem unwarranted. So the occult influences are those influences that are not visible to our normal senses. They are influences which females are generally much more intuitively aware of and stronger in than males. So women will generally be much more receptive to talk of occult influences than men. So I want to talk about the occult influences and to give a framework in which they can be much better understood by the rational mind. To that end, I will talk about the physics of occult influences. Here I will give some essential background on what physicists have learned about the nature of matter and energy and the manner in which influences propagate, and I will then use this framework to explain the occult influences. This may seem a little technical, but I think it will be well worth the effort to digest. So that is this podcast. Let me now begin with a talk about the physics of occult influences. I should firstly say that I'm quite excited by this. I have studied theoretical physics now for over 20 years, and a couple of years ago I gave up my independent studies in order that I could focus on yoga and my developing occult wisdom. I basically had to make a choice, so the physics had to go, as I couldn't do both. There wasn't enough time. But I do miss physics. It's a topic that I love, so it's great to be able to wield that knowledge in what is essentially a new arena of physics, one that is not yet accepted in academia, but one which is nonetheless very real. So I want to talk firstly about physics and what physicists have discovered about the nature of matter and energy and the way they transmit influences. And then I want to expand on this to introduce the occult influences. New Age intuitives talk about energy a lot, and so do physicists. The energy that the physicists talk about are generally described as mechanical. That is, they obey fixed laws and do not seem to be sentient. The energies that the New Age intuitives describe do not seem to obey fixed laws and possess a high degree of sentience, as they are able to engage with the conscious mind of the intuitive. So we have the mechanical energies of physics related to the outer or physical world, and the living energies of the intuitives related to the inner world and the psyche. These two sets of energies possess what are known as complementary properties. They are yin and yang. The living energies of the intuitives are more volitional than mechanical and are highly sentient, relating to the inner world. And the energies of physics are very mechanical, are not so sentient, and are related to the outer world. Although these energies are complementary, like the energies portrayed in the yin and yang symbol, they do also possess attributes of the other. The energies of physics also possess sentience. If you have developed your sensitivity, then you can be receptive to the psychic influences of physical objects and physical energies. They have an effect on your mind. What's more, they also act as conduits and sponges for the subtle intuitive energies. If you place your hand on a tree, for example, energy or life force will pass between you, and in this way one can establish a link with other minds. Not the mind of the tree, but that of the spirits that inhabit the environment that the tree is in. One can call this the underworld. These minds can be trivial and full of trickery. They can be deeply malevolent and disturbing, or they can be very loving and possess wisdom. So physical matter can act as a channel for the subtle energies to flow, and this can occur because physical matter is psychic in nature. It too is a type of life force. That is, it is a psychic substance which possesses psychic qualities and is not simply a dead mechanical substance. Science only measures physical qualities and ignores the mental and psychic aspects of the world, and because of that, it remains blind to the real nature of physical matter. Similarly, the subtle energies, though highly sentient, also possess mechanical attributes. We see these mechanical attributes at work most clearly in the laws of astrology, which govern the ebb and flow of these subtle energies. So we have a yin and yang situation with the subtle and physical energies. While they do possess complementary properties, they are not mutually exclusive because each contains elements of the other, but to a lesser degree. I listened to a talk recently from a Jungian analyst on the return of the archetypal feminine. In the talk she questioned the notions of masculine and feminine and asked, what are they? Do they even exist? What is it that we think is exclusively masculine, and what is it we think is exclusively feminine? The answer is nothing, because both the masculine and feminine polarities also possess the qualities of the other. They are a yin and yang dynamic. While they are clearly very different energies, they are not mutually exclusive energies, with one possessing properties that the other doesn't. Instead, they are complementary energies. They complement each other. Their difference lies in the balance of qualities that each possesses and the way these qualities express themselves and balance each other. The feminine can be aggressive and warlike, and the masculine can be protective and nurturing. But the way they express these is very different. We see this in the well-known yin and yang symbol, where the black half has a white dot and the white half has a black dot. There is no quality that the yang possesses that the yin doesn't, and vice versa. Nonetheless, they are very different energies, and a dynamic exists between them. This difference and the resulting dynamic comes about due to the different balance of the various qualities that each possesses and the different expression of those qualities. So the same is true for the physical energies and the subtle energies. It is not that they possess mutually exclusive properties, but rather that they possess the same properties, but in differing amounts, and also differ in the way these properties express themselves. This is very important to understand, for from this understanding comes a very profound insight that I shall describe shortly. So let me give this idea of complementarity a name. I shall call it the principle of correspondence. One well-known example of the principle of correspondence is the famous as above, so below expression of the Hermetic tradition and the perennial philosophy. However, as above, so below is a crude description of this dynamic, and it is also misleading, for it tends to suggest in the mind that the outer world is mirrored by the inner world, when this is not the case at all. The masculine and the feminine are not mirror images, and neither are the outer or inner worlds, or the physical or subtle energies. We are not dealing with mirror images. The principle of correspondence, as I have described it here, portrays a much more accurate picture. While there is a correspondence between the two energies, that correspondence is complementary and not a simple mirroring. For example, the yin and yang symbol does not possess reflective symmetry. One half is not a reflection of the other. There is no as above, so below. Instead, there is a complementarity, and that complementarity sets up a potential between them that results in dynamism, a flow of energy. I said the principle of correspondence leads to a very profound insight, so let me describe that insight. In this podcast, I want to bring to light the occult world and the workings of the occult world, and to do so I am going to apply the principle of correspondence as I have described it. Now, the energies of the occult world are very different to the energies of the physical world, but at the same time they each possess identical properties. There is no property that the subtle energies possess that the physical energies do not possess, and vice versa. The difference lies in the expression and preponderance of the various properties that these two energies possess. Now, physics has described the workings of the physical energies in astonishing detail, and that means that we can utilize the principle of correspondence to apply the knowledge of physics to the workings of the subtle energies also, and it is by doing this that we are going to discover some very profound insights. So, I have paved the way to talk now about physics and the physical description of energy, in order that we can use that model to understand the occult world. In physics, energy has two fundamental expressions. It expresses itself as particulate matter, which means matter composed of particles, such as atoms, and it expresses itself as a wave. Matter and waves possess mutually exclusive properties. For example, matter has solidity, but waves are immaterial. Matter is localized in the form of an object with a definite boundary, whereas waves are non-local and do not possess any clear boundaries. If I put a radio on in a room, everyone can hear it, as the waves of energy that it radiates fill the whole room, and are not just fixed in one corner of the room. On the other hand, if I am in the room playing with a ball, then only I can play with the ball, as the ball is a very localized phenomenon, and exists only in one spot, and is not spread out over the whole room. So energy can manifest in these two very different ways. Let me now apply the principle of correspondence to mental energy. We generate mental energy all the time, as we are constantly thinking or imagining things, but we don't often think of our mentality as a form of energy. In Jungian psychoanalysis, mental energy is known as libido, a form of psychic energy. We may be tempted to think of mental energy as a type of physical energy. Our brain, for example, consumes 20% of our body's total calorific requirements, which is a terrific amount. We may think that this high calorific requirement of the brain is due to the fact that our brain generates our thoughts and imaginings and requires physical energy to do so. We may then conclude that mental energy is a form of physical energy. That would be an incorrect conclusion, however. What we can conclude from the empirical evidence is that physical energy can be converted into mental energy. We know from physics that energy can be converted into many different forms, and so the fact that physical energy can be converted into mental energy isn't really anything amazing. That does not mean that physical energy is the same as mental energy, as it is very clear that we can do things with mental energy that we cannot do with physical energy. Our minds can mould mental energy as we wish, but we cannot do this with physical energy. So the two energies are very different. Furthermore, if one has experience in yoga or with some psychic ability, then one can perceive directly how different forms of life force that one encounters in nature can also produce mental energy. In fact, New Age intuitive channelers rely on this very fact when they are channeling life force energy and interpreting it. They are relying on this energy being able to produce feelings, thoughts and images in their minds, which is what they use when they attempt to recommunicate the message verbally to others. That energy may come from connecting with a tree, or with a cosmic source, or with a river or a mountain. Life force is radiated by all things, but whatever the source, it can also be converted into mental energy. So mental energy is not confined to or reliant upon physical energy. While physical energy is clearly the main way that the brain generates mental energy, it is not the only way that we can experience mental energy. As I explained, we can experience mental energy from any source of life force, including the stars in the night sky. So let me go back to explaining how we can utilize the basic knowledge of physics, that energy manifests as matter and waves, to provide a profound insight into mental energy. We have seen that mental energy is a form of energy in its own right, distinct from physical energy and from other sources of life force. From the principle of correspondence, we can establish that mental energy can manifest in two forms, as mental matter and as mental waves. Whenever we generate mental energy, it is going to manifest in these two forms, either as waves or as matter. Now, waves propagate from one place to another. Waves are how energy travels, and that means that every thought or image or imagining that we generate also generates waves of mental energy that propagate into and influence our surroundings. These waves of mental energy will have the tendency to leave imprints on the surroundings and to influence others in a like manner. In this way, an environment may come to possess a certain mentality to it as a result of the mental energy it has been impregnated with by the people who have been there. Think of a library, for example, or a bohemian coffee shop. Often the reason why we may like a place is because of the mentality of the space, and that is a direct result of the mental energy that the place radiates. Similarly, if we go to a place where there has been violence or trauma, then the energies will be very scary and will produce difficult mental contents. 3 years ago, I spent a year in 2 different inner-city homeless hostels. The mental energy contained in those places was truly terrible and produced devastating effects on my mentality that I had to battle every day. It was a battle of attrition, which after 1 year wore me down sufficiently to cause a mental breakdown. I had seen the signs up to a month previously, and I knew it was coming, and I remember the very day it happened. A part of my higher being collapsed and broke down, and as a result I resumed eating meat, sugar, caffeine, all the things which I had given up in order to develop my yoga and to live an ethical life. Part of my higher consciousness was destroyed by the mental energies of these terribly dark places I was living in, and it took me another 6 months of patient practice before I could recover sufficiently to regain once again my higher path. So mental energy propagates just as physical energy does. And just as physical energy leaves an energetic imprint on the environment, raising its heat energy, so too does mental energy, though its effects are much more complex and involve mentality and the many qualities of the mental realm, such as volition, thought, memory, intention. Mental energy also has very different properties of propagation, and though I will not go into these matters in detail here, let me at least say that the laws of propagation of mental energy follow the laws of astrology and will be a topic for a future podcast called The Nature of Astrological Influences. Mental energy can also manifest as matter, as all forms of energy have this duality to them. We don't often think of mental energy as matter. Of course, what I mean by matter is not physical matter, but mental matter. As a form of energy, mental energy can manifest as a form of matter. Many people will find this difficult to grasp. So let me talk a little bit more about physics and the nature of matter before I come back to talking about mental matter and its properties. For it is only by understanding the conception of matter provided by modern physics that mental matter can be properly understood and placed in context. In physics, matter is composed of point-like particles with no dimensions. We often think of a particle as a sphere or a little ball of solid matter, but this is not the conception of particles provided by modern physics. Conceiving of a particle as being a sphere of matter presents immediate and severe, irreconcilable problems that I shan't go into here, but suffice to say that for these reasons, particles are conceived of as being point-like with no dimensions. From these mysterious entities radiate energy, and it is the energies that the particles radiate that are responsible for the experience of solidity which we have come to associate with physical matter, which is only one form of matter. However, there is no reason why particles and the energies they radiate need be associated with solidity. That is, the association of matter with solidity is simply a bias of our own experience with physical matter and is not a generic property of particulate matter. So when we talk about mental matter, we are not talking about a form of matter that possesses solidity in the sense that physical matter does. We cannot generate mental matter and then make something physical from it, as it is not physical matter. It is a very different form of matter, but what it shares with physical matter is the property of being particulate in nature, that is, composed of particles, one of two forms that all energy can manifest as. To go back to physical matter and the description of physical matter by modern physics, the nature of the fields of energy that particles radiate determine their properties and the properties of the matter they constitute. If we take solidity as an example of a property that a particle can possess, then particles acquire physicality or solidity by interacting with certain types of quantum fields, such as the Higgs field. Through this association, the particles come to possess properties like mass or electromagnetism, but there is no requirement for particles to interact with, for example, the Higgs field, and if they don't, then they will not produce the phenomena associated with physical matter, such as solidity. In other words, in modern physics, there can be classes of particles that do not possess any interaction with the Higgs field, and as a result, do not possess any mass or other properties of solid matter. Mental matter is composed of particles that do not interact with the Higgs field, and thus do not possess mass or physicality. That means that our physical bodies will not interact with mental matter, in the sense that we cannot generate mental matter, make a wall out of it, and then walk into the wall with our physical body. Mental matter does not possess physical mass or electromagnetic properties. That does not mean that mental matter does not exist. Mental matter exists, and while it does not act as a barrier to physical matter, it does act as a barrier to subtle matter and subtle energies. We can protect ourselves from adverse mental influences, for example, by generating a shield of mental energy around ourselves, and we can use occult objects, such as crystals, to strengthen that shield. This shield is a shield of mental matter that blocks the flow of mental energy into our energetic being, just as a wall of physical matter can block physical energy. Recall also in the earlier podcast on the subtle body that we have a subtle body as well as a physical body. While our physical body is made of physical matter, our subtle body is not. Part of its composition is of mental matter, and just as physical matter forms intricate structures and organs which make up the physical body, so too does mental matter form itself into intricate structures which make up part of our subtle body. These structures of mental matter can live beyond the lifetime of the physical body and can act as a separate vehicle for consciousness, provided it has been developed sufficiently for a practice such as yoga. These structures of mental matter can also channel the mental energies of astrological transits into our mind, so that we are better able to discern their influence and to commune with them. But these structures are not the same as the mental matter that we form with our thoughts and imaginings. These forms of matter do not exist for long, unless they have been produced with a very strong intention developed over a long period of time. In modern physics, most forms of physical matter are extremely ephemeral and live only for a very tiny fraction of time. It is only the atomic matter of the everyday objects that we see that endures for very long periods of time. The same distinction can be made with mental matter. Mostly the mental matter we create with our thoughts and imaginings is very short-lived and will decompose back into mental energy, just as most forms of physical matter quickly decay back into forms of physical energy, such as photons of light. In the occult world, working with positive intentions is a very common practice. Through developing a very strong intention to benefit others over a very long period of time, one develops a mental entity that is capable of enduring for a much longer period of time. Such entities can move about of their own volition in order to carry out the intentions that they have been imbued with. On the other hand, in an inner-city homeless hostel, where for decades many broken and despairing souls have lived, mental entities can be generated through unconscious malice and ill will, which can also persist for a very, very long time, and which can grow extremely powerful enough to break the mind of a conscious spiritual practitioner, as was my case. training and developing in yoga involves not only bringing the mind under control so that it no longer generates such entities, but also in learning how to sense their presence, their origin, learning their abilities and manner of operation, of how to commune with them and to understand their intention, and also in learning how to destroy them or to defend yourself against them. The occult world, like the physical world, is a world full of dangerous organisms, many of which are only animated by the intentions of the being or beings who generated them, and which subsequently live by feeding off of the mental energies of others. These entities are made of mental matter, which does not interact with physical matter, so they cannot be seen or touched except through the development of the intuitive faculties. But they can produce mental effects and possess an intelligence of their own. Many so-called gods and other deities or local spirits are examples of such mental elementals, as are many ghosts and other types of apparitions. Due to spiritual ignorance, these phenomena can persist for a very long time and cause great mayhem and suffering. Let me recap at this point. So far I have spoken of the classification of energy by physics into two distinct forms, that of waves and that of particles. I have used the principle of correspondence to apply this understanding to show how mental energy can manifest and of how it operates in the world, and is capable of imbuing environments with mental properties. I then expounded on the conception of matter by modern physics in order to give a more coherent and better explanation of mental matter, and proceeded to use this insight to explain briefly some types of occult phenomena, such as the use of intentions to benefit others, or the generation of mental elementals, such as some classes of ghosts, spirits and deities. I have only touched upon these matters in this podcast, which really only aims at opening the door to a coherent understanding of these types of occult phenomena, utilising the concepts of modern physics. The world of mental energy and mental matter is a world similar to the physical world we perceive with our physical senses, and exists not in some separate dimension, but alongside it, as part of it, just as neutrinos and dark energy are part of our existing reality, even though we can't see them or interact with them. Humanity as a whole has yet to awaken to the realities and influences of the wider mental realm that exists beyond our own minds, despite knowledge of it existing for thousands of years. As a result, humanity is unconsciously influenced by it and unable to protect itself from it, to its greater detriment. Another type of subtle energy that needs to be considered in this light is known as astral energy, and pertains to what is often referred to as the astral world. Like the mental world, the astral world is not a separate world to our existing reality, but exists as part of it. It manifests as forms of matter and waves, with properties very different to physical matter and waves. The best way to understand astral energy is by first-hand experience, for the way that we perceive astral energy is through our feeling abilities. Our bodily sensitivity to these energies generates feelings that we experience. Our sensation or our feeling of solidity, for example, is as a result of an astral energy. Today, people are conditioned into thinking that their feelings arise from inert, emotionless molecules known as hormones or neurotransmitters. In answer to this, it is important to remember that atomic matter is a psychic substance and is imbued with properties that minds have, such as volition, feeling, memory. In other words, molecules are far more mysterious and incredible than science has hitherto considered. And yes, it is certainly the case that the class of psychic substances known as hormones or neurotransmitters do produce feelings in us, but what is not known is the manner in which they do so. It is likely that they do so by attracting certain forms of astral energy into the body, and it is in this manner that the hormones and neurotransmitters work to produce certain types of feelings. In other words, the feelings are produced not by the hormones or neurotransmitters themselves, but by the astral energies that they attract. It is also true that the body is capable of generating astral energy itself, but in my mind, That is a cellular process and not a hormonal or neurological one. The cells of the body possess an intelligence and volition of their own, and the mind of our body is something that consciousness has to come to terms with at some point in its spiritual growth. Astral energies are intimately tied up with the body and its cellular composition, but also exist independently of it. For that reason, keeping the body sensitive to astral energy is a key component of yoga, and is why yoga is a holistic discipline. Consuming caffeine or tobacco or alcohol, for example, will severely blunt the body's sensitivity to astral energy, as will eating junk food or meat. So we experience astral energies as feelings, including the more primitive feelings such as desires. Every time we generate a feeling, we are generating astral energy. Alternatively, whenever we experience a feeling, we are experiencing astral energy, either that which is latent within the environment or that which is radiated by another object, such as a river or tree. Trees are an amazing source of astral energy, and most people will find the feelings that they have within an environment of trees to be extremely pleasant and life-enhancing. The astral energies in a city alleyway, on the other hand, can be extremely disgusting and grim, and not at all life-enhancing. Our urban areas are generally strong conduits for malefic astral energies that are ultimately extremely deleterious to our humanity. As a form of energy, astral energy can manifest as particulate matter or as waves of energy. Every time we generate feelings, we are radiating those feelings as an astral energy out into the wider environment. Just as places can absorb and radiate the mental energies that they absorb, so too can they absorb and radiate the astral energies that they absorb. And just as all bodies emit life force, so too do all bodies radiate astral energy. Each place or environment has its own very specific astral energy, and the more sensitive we are to it, the more receptive we will be and better able to open up and connect to it and to go deep into it. The world of feeling is a very complex world, and the feeling states that can be communicated can be extremely sophisticated, indicative of a very high order of intelligence. I have personally experienced feelings that were like a very complex language, far more sophisticated than the primitive vocal sounds that the human ape mutters and which pass as communication. I have also experienced feeling states that were beyond what words can describe. In our dominant material culture, we downplay feeling states as though they are irrelevant, when in fact they represent the future evolution of the human race. Our spiritual evolution is not towards vocal sounds or cognitive equations, but towards ever more complex and evolved feeling states. When we understand that our feeling states are a form of energy, a sophisticated form of energy, then we can understand that these energies can communicate meaning, just as waves of electromagnetic energy can communicate meaning through our radios or television sets. By opening up and developing our sensitivity, we can develop our minds, and we can develop minds capable of understanding these feeling states, minds that can form an integral part of the natural world, capable of understanding it at a level far beyond the relative trivialities that science describes. This is our evolution as a species. Let me return back to the astral energy that our bodies generate. Our feeling states are an important factor to consider, for they have a direct influence on the environment and on others. If we spend a lot of time generating negative feelings, we are polluting our environment and corrupting the minds of all other beings who inhabit it, which will in turn create more destructive astral energy. So it is important, if we wish to live in a better world, to begin getting to grips with our feeling states, not by repressing them and papering them over with plastic positivity, but by working on the deeper emotional problems that they are the symptoms of. The other component of astral energy is its manifestation as astral matter. Astral matter, like mental matter, is particular in nature, but does not interact with the Higgs field, and so does not produce solidity. That is, it does not obstruct our physical body or any other physical object. It exists alongside us, but we cannot see it, as it does not interact with the ordinary matter of our physical senses. Just as the mental matter we generate has a short lifetime, so too does most astral matter. It will quickly break down into waves of astral energy. We can become aware of the astral energies in our environment or during astrological transits by developing our third eye. This is not an easy task to accomplish, however, but requires a dedicated practice over many years. Some people have a naturally developed psychic ability with their third eye and are able to see into the astral world. The experiences of such people vary, as the third eye is not like normal eyesight, so perhaps I will confine myself to talking about my own experiences. The development of my own third eye has been severely hampered by damage done to it by malefic entities, such as those in the homeless hostels I have lived in. So while it is functional, it is also considerably impaired. Nonetheless, I know when astral entities are present, and especially when danger is near. This can happen in many ways. Either I get a direct vision in my mind's eye of the entity, or I get a warning from one of the Shakti energies of my subtle body that have been developed with my yogic practice. Such a warning usually occurs via a sign of some kind. Or lastly, I will see the entity as a kind of semi-hallucination, like an apparition. The latter usually occurs through some kind of chaotic background with indefinite form, such as clouds or the leaves on a tree, that then assumes the shape of the entity. An indefinite background can be used by the third eye to create a form of the astral entities and communicate that to consciousness. Because my third eye is impaired and has been developed in very dangerous places, it really only allows me to see very strong astral entities that present an immediate danger. So my experience of the astral energies is limited when compared with others who have fully developed this capability in good conditions. The world is filled with astral energy and with astral entities made out of astral matter, just as the physical world we see is full of physical energy and biological entities made out of physical matter. Biological evolution will eventually drive humanity to develop its third eye to full capacity. For those that do not, will simply not survive. When that happens, the world that we experience will not only consist of physical matter and physical organisms, but we will also be able to see astral matter and astral entities, as well as mental matter and mental entities. By the time of the Aquarian Age and the cultures that will thrive during that age, the development of these powers of the subtle body will be an integral part of growing up. Due to spiritual ignorance, the astral and mental energies that are present on the earth now are extremely malevolent and are at critical danger levels, and as a result are going to cause a global meltdown of the human psyche, a collapse not just of the physical systems that underpin the modern world, but also the psyche itself. We can think of it as astral and mental pollution, which, like other forms of pollution such as CO2, is reaching levels that are toxic to life. That is the sort of evolutionary crisis that is going to occur as a result of spiritual ignorance, and which will occur again and again until humanity evolves its spiritual potential and starts to deal with the astral and mental realms. I have not discussed the effects of combining astral matter and mental matter, and of the types of elemental entities that are created in this manner, and of their effects on the world. It is these entities that present the real danger today, and which are going to cause a collapse of the human psyche on a global scale. That collapse is already happening, as can be seen in the drastic decline in moral standards that we have seen over the past century, the rise of mass psychosis, conspiracy theories, confusion on what is true or false, and many other phenomena present today, such as the mental health crisis. Just as physical pollution destroys the biosphere, so does spiritual pollution, such as the negative mental and astral energies that modern city-dwelling peoples spew out, also destroy the healthy functioning of the human psyche. We are in the endgame of the age of Pisces, and it is going to be extremely ugly on many levels as the global system breaks down. It is time for those who can to make the transition to the new consciousness, otherwise it is never going to happen, and for those people, the age of Aquarius will never come. That is all for this podcast. I hope it has been illuminating, and I will speak again soon.